Good day to you, my lovely viewers. Last week I did a couple of videos, which was going to be the start of a new series called 10 Things I Hate About. And then it would be a band I like I did Rush and Yes, I love those two bands. But I would then go through what I hate about that band. And I got to be honest, I'm sick of having to come up with 10 things. And so I'm still going to do that today. I'm going to carry on with this series. I've been really looking forward to do it, but I've changed it a little bit. So now it's going to be called Warts and All, with an N, Warts and All. So it'll be called Deep Purple, Warts and All. And I'm going to go through Deep Purple, which is one of my favourite bands, and I am going to tell you what I love about them, but also what I hate about them. It's going to just be an honest appraisal of that band. I'm going to try and be subjective in that I really love Deep Purple. You know, one of my favourite bands, you know, and I want to champion them and be all like, aren't they amazing? But I've also got things, you know, I want to say about them, issues that I have with Deep Purple. And I hope this will give us an accurate idea. Now, if this works as an idea, then I will roll this out to every single band I like, giving me tons and tons of content to do, which you like, and I like. A very simple thing. I'm just going to talk about the bands that I like. That's what I'm going to do. No top tens, you know, and hopefully the Warts and All brand, if it gets off the ground, will carry it through. And you might get some hate on here. I might do a bit of ranting, but I might do a bit of loving, because the thing is that one of the things that's worrying me is the fact that I come out and do these hate videos. Everyone loves the fact that I do the hate videos, and then everyone moans about me that I'm spreading hate and acting like an absolute idiot. If you get onto a forum and read about me, I was doing it last night, people hate me. They absolutely hate me. And the reason is because I come out and go, bloody Neil Young, he's horrible, I don't like his hair, it's too dry, and he needs to grease it down a little bit, and he can't play the guitar properly, and I don't like the fact he always looks like a lumberjack, and he pretends to be working class and he's not, you know, and all this stuff. And I've been classing into it and all politics and wind everybody up, and everybody wants to watch those videos because they like it. They get some music information, but in a way which is entertaining, you know. So that's the brand, isn't it? So I'm going to try and adjust it here. Anyone watches the channel regularly will know I did a video last week called 10 More Mediocre Artists That the Critics Love. But actually, really, that was a completely vicious attack on this syndrome that exists on my channel. It was a lampoon of that. I lampooned it with all sorts of special effects and incredible storylines that are running through. On this video, I am just going to sit here and chat, which is what I like to do. That's the best sort of YouTubing for me. I think, you know, switch the camera on, get the lighting nice and moody, you know, all get comfy and cozy, then just talk and tell you what you think. Just say what you think, Andy. I am going to. I just want to take this opportunity to say that so many of you are watching this aren't bloody subscribed. So why don't you subscribe, you ungrateful bastard? Now, I often put a little bit of an introduction on my videos. I shouldn't really. As a YouTuber, I know I should kick straight in. There's people who just want to hear me talk about Deep Purple, but I like to, you know, lay the land out. I do like to, you know, is that the right phrase? You know, I like a little bit of it. I try and do no more than 5 minutes. I know people complain that I don't get to the point, but I am deliberately not getting to the point now. I am deliberately doing it. It's like a little bit like a test. It's a little bit like a test for true followers of my channel, true followers, disciples, I could say. They're true disciples of this channel. They will be laughing to themselves because they know that this bit is annoying, and they know there's a certain type of anal retentive, no sense of humour, you know, short attention span durs out there that can't stick the fact that I'm treading water here and not getting to the point. They don't like it, and they know I'm doing it to get on their nerves, and I know that they know that I know I'm doing it to get on their nerves, and I am doing it just to get on their nerves. I could have gone straight in with this, but I'm going up to the full 5 minutes, and just to be annoying, I'm going to do the full 5 minutes. The full 5 minutes, I am just going to be talking rubbish. Now, this is anti-YouTubing. I should be kicking in straight away into the video, not spending 5 minutes getting to the point. You know, that is not the way you do it. You have to have the thumbnail You have to have the title, people are drawn in there, and then they need to get at least a little bit. They need to be given something in the first 5 minutes, not just have somebody waffling on, you know. But I am waffling on here, but I will just do the first 5. I'll let you know. You can always fast forward to this point right now when we start talking about Deep Purple. So, Deep Purple were formed the year I was born, 1968. This band is still going, right, although it's stopped and started, for 57 bloody years. 57 years. Ian Gillan is like 80 years old now, and they're still going. Are they any good now? Well, I would say they are. And this never gets talked about. I think the last album they did was great. They haven't fallen into the traps of, you say, Yes, who've carried on but never been quite as good as they were in the early days. How the modern Deep Purple relates to old Deep Purple, we're going to get into on this video. But let's scoot right back to the beginning. Let's scoot back to 1968. There's this very exciting scene going on in London. All sorts of musicians from all sorts of backgrounds have pulled together. And rather than bands being formed in the garages in hometowns, which is the normal thing with rock and roll, bands are being formed out of the sort of burgeoning session scene that's happening in London in the 1960s. And that session scene is full of incredibly competent session players, classical players who can read music, come in and do the sessions, work out, you know, turning up to BBC sessions, playing in orchestras. But with this newfangled rock and roll that's emerged, they need a few musicians that can deliver that. A few, you know, musicians that can do sort of rock and roll guitar solos like Chuck Berry, or maybe the new hip beats, you know, that's coming out of like Motown and stuff like that. And so they go searching for those musicians, and this actually finds a whole bunch of incredibly skilled musicians, okay? Ritchie Blackmore arrives in London in the early 60s, and he joins a band called The Outlaws, which is then picked up by Joe Meek. Now, Joe Meek is like the British Phil Spector, i.e. much better than Phil Spector. And he built a studio above some shop somewhere with all these weird electronic devices and stuff, and then basically made these instrumental singles and rock and roll singles with all these sort of modern sounds. And he had a hit with a tune called Telstar, which was by a band called The Tornadoes, of which the keyboardist Roger Laverne was born literally 200 yards away from where I live now. He's from my hometown. And Joe Meek was a bit of a genius, really. And a bit like Phil Spector. And because he's British, he got there quicker than Phil Spector ever did. He did commit murder. It was you! At some point, we have to remember this. About 1967, he shot his landlady. Although there's a question of whether he actually did shoot her or whether it was an accident or not an accident. Anyway, it's a whole big story.
I'm involved in mystical things, yeah. I wear a lot of black clothing, maybe. And I'm a very quiet person.
Ritchie Blackmore came out of that Joe Meek experimental session world. He then carries on with the Outlaws. He joins forces with a whole bunch of musicians who are working on this session scene. They're very, very talented. And as rock starts to emerge and Cream get together and form this like super group, all right, of these types of players, that becomes the thing. And so in 1968, a couple of years after Cream is formed, Ritchie Blackmore decides to do the same thing with another virtuoso keyboardist, John Lord. Now, John Lord is classically trained, but he's playing the Hammond organ. Now, the Hammond organ is a relatively new instrument. It was created in 1935. It was designed for home use. It's a home organ, right? And it operates like an organ. It's not like a piano, right? It's not like a harpsichord. It's got drawbars the same as an organ. So it was designed originally to replicate the sort of organ you'd have in a church, and it was for home use. It had foot pedals, and it had a Leslie speaker that would sort of spin round and give it this sort of out in the atmosphere type of sound. In the 1950s and 60s, the jazz musicians got hold of it, and they started to use it in trios with guitar, organ, drums. And these organ trios, you know, like Jimmy Smith and Jack McDuff and all that, they come into being, and they sound new. You know, people who listen to it go, that sounds really interesting. What's that sound? People didn't know what that sound was. Hammond organ, you see. And the Hammond organ then works its way in, because these bands are emerging in the 60s. They start to do soul crossover type stuff, funky stuff, and fusion starts to emerge out of that. The fusion between jazz and rock is really sublimated in the Tony Williams Lifetime, which is an organ trio. The organ's really important. It becomes one of the keyboards, and the organ's the most cutting of the instruments. And John Lord has the idea of passing his organ through a very British invention, which is the Marshall stack, overdriving it and giving it a cutting sound. When he teams up with Ritchie Blackmore, who is one of the great guitarists of that period, equal to Clapton, Hendrix, and Jeff Beck. He is an incredible guitar player. When they get together, there's a certain sound between Ritchie Blackmore's riffing guitar and John Lord's Hammond organ through the amp. They team up with a very young drummer, just 20 at the time, Ian Pace. Ian Pace is like a virtuoso drummer. I mean, people go on about John Bonham, and, you know, there's, you know, all the various rock drummers around the time. Ian Pace is a Buddy Rich style drummer with a ton of chops. So you've got these very chopsy players. They bring in a couple of pop guys. They get a deal in 68. Rod Evans and Nick Simper, by the way, those people. I thought I would not be able to remember their names, but they did pop into my aged memory, from my aged memory into my mouth. So I did remember that. And they do their first album. Now, this first album's not a rock album. It's sort of a psychedelic, funky, soul-y, bluesy type of thing, which is the thing. They're not invented heavy metal at this point. Led Zeppelin hasn't happened. Black Sabbath hasn't happened. They do the first album, and they have a hit single with a cover of a Neil Diamond song called Hush. Now, Hush is like a funky, psychedelic 60s song. It's bloody brilliant. It's amazing. Especially that organ that kicks in at the beginning with John Lord. I love it. Whenever that came out, 1968, 69. Who's as good as that? Nobody's as good as that. Deep Purple are amazing off that single, right? The fact that on the albums they are exploring a sort of weird, progressive, improvisy, jammy type of sound, you know, and it's a bit unfocused, really. It's a bit unfocused. But that hit single, they don't get dropped. They do a couple of albums. Booker T. Elysian, Shades of Deep Purple, and this burgeoning progressive rock thing is happening. And now I think Deep Purple could have easily become a progressive rock band. John Lord had this idea of creating an album in 1970, which was going to be called a concerto for rock group and orchestra. And he makes this album. This album's amazing. It pits a rock band against an orchestra. Now, there's always a problem with that because of volume and dynamics and recording. You know, rock bands like to be recorded in a sort of closed space with separation. Orchestras need to be in a big room. Put a rock band in a big room and it's just a big noise. And so they get around that by the band, the orchestra and the rock band never quite gel together. But what's interesting about that album, I think it's quite successful. And there is a certain way of improvising that Deep Purple have developed by this time. And this is integrated in with the orchestra. This improvising thing that they're doing is fascinating. We could talk about how great Led Zeppelin was a live band, or Black Sabbath, or even Cream, or even the Jimi Hendrix Experience. But in terms of wild live improvisations on stage in a rock context, Deep Purple are the kings. They're doing stuff that no one else is doing. And a lot of this is down to the show that Ritchie Blackmore's putting on. He's stood there dressed in black. He's got all these flamboyant moves, and you know he throws the guitar around. He feedback. He's got all this shtick going on, and the band sort of back that up. There's a trade-off here. John Lord, who is one of the great geniuses in Deep Purple, had this idea of the orchestra and the rock band. He wanted to pursue that, and it didn't work. It didn't sell. So now it's like, oh, over to Ritchie. What are you going to do then, Ritchie? And Ritchie's got his ear to what's going on, and he's got his ear to what Led Zeppelin are doing, basically. Hendrix and Led Zeppelin. And so he changes it and he just amps it up. And he brings in not only a heavier sound, but he brings in a new singer, Ian Gillan. Ian Gillan is basically a musical theatre singer. He's been in Jesus Christ Superstar. And he comes out singing in this very high falsetto way, which is Ritchie Blackmore's response to Robert Plant. He's going, well, you think Robert Plant can sing high? What about Ian Gillan? So they got this guy. Also, Robert was a very handsome man, very good looking, and so was Ian Gillan. Blackmore spotted the idea of having a good looking, long haired, lead singer singing in a high voice. The thing about Ritchie Blackmore, now this is where it creeps in. I think the guy's a genius and he's a visionary, but his visionariness is really about, I would say, adapting people's other ideas. He's very derivative of everybody else. Most of the riffs in Deep Purple that Blackmore come up with are just lifted from somewhere else, right? And most of the ideas, the vision, everything he's taking from other areas. But he does have a vision. He has a vision for Deep Purple. It's accelerated. Led Zeppelin brought this sort of, they took the blues and they amped it up, made it much bigger, and that sort of, that with the sort of accelerated summertime blues, Eddie Cochran sound, they, on that first album, produced part of the blueprint for heavy metal. Black Sabbath come out with their debut album, 1970, same thing, but they're doing all the doomy sort of riffy type of stuff. Uriah Heep come out and they've got another aspect on it, on Very Heavy, Very Humble. Deep Purple, what they bring is speed. And on Deep Purple in Rock in 1970, which is an absolute masterpiece and is part of those great 4 albums that lay the groundwork for heavy metal, the groundwork that's laid on that is the sort of screaminess of the vocals and the guitar, but most importantly, the speed. Whereas the Sabbath are going, bam, bam, down, all of that, and then Zeppelin again, except for Communication Breakdown, where they bring in that much more punky approach. Deep Purple take that and run with it, and Speed King is the beginning of that sort of, we could almost call it thrash metal. On the follow-up on Fireball, the title track of Fireball, you bring the double bass drums in. That's the area they're exploring. So Deep Purple, with the acquisition of Ian Gillan and Roger Glover on bass, who comes in, who seems to be a very stable member of the band. He provides stability, Roger Glover, and he's never really mentioned when people talk about great bass players, even though he was the bass player in one of the greatest rock bands in history. He doesn't get a mention, doesn't he? I met Roger Glover once backstage at a gig I was doing at Cambridge Folk Festival, and I had a long talk to him about Deep Purple, especially made in Japan. And part of what I'm saying now is coming from that. Roger Glover was a bit like Noel Redding in that he was a folk guy. And he brought in that sensibility. He wasn't like a virtuoso bass player or anything, but he was a good bass player and he knew how to do what he's thinking. But I think he was solid, and I think a lot of these great rock bands, that's what they needed. John Paul Jones was a multi-instrumentalist. His genius line there was a good bass player, great bass player. Geezer Butler was much more flamboyant in the sort of Jack Bruce mold. Roger Glover's sort of, he does really play. When you listen to the improvisation, he's doing all sorts of stuff. An interesting band and a perfect band. Now, for me, this is where the criticisms start to happen. Deep Purple in Rock is an absolute masterpiece, and as a studio album, they never bettered it. But the thing with Deep Purple is what made them great was when they were live. It's the mixture of that accelerating, screaming, speedy sort of heavy metal approach with what they had already, which was this sort of psychedelic British Grateful Dead, but with chops. Ability to spin out these long, psychedelic, free-form improvisations. When I discovered heavy rock, as we used to call it in 1980, there were 3 bands that I absolutely loved. They were the backbone of my listening. That was White Snake, it was Rainbow, and it was the Ian Gillan band, which was called Gillan. Those bands were very successful in the 1980s. They were getting in the charts. My journey from listening to just pop music and being a kid just listening to like Barbara Dixon and bloody B.A. Robinson in the late 70s to liking rock music happened in February 1980 when All Night Long came out by Rainbow, followed up by Fool for Your Loving by White Snake. Gillan was to come out with a whole bunch of records at that point. Mutually Assured Destruction came out quite a time later, bought that single. New Orleans, which was a cover of the Gary U.S. Bonds tune, I bought that. But Gillan was having hit records. He was appearing as well on television. I can remember a concert being shown in the daytime, in the summer holidays, in the daytime. I can remember taping this, and it got Bernie Tormey on guitar. It was incredible. Those three bands were amazing. And those three bands had all come out of Deep Purple. So I was aware of this Deep Purple, even though they'd called it a day 4 or 5 years before I got into music. So my mom used to go up to Macro to get various items. She used to take me, but there's a thing called Macro up the road from where I live, and it's basically a shop where you don't have to pay VAT if you've got a business. You get a card because you've got a shop business. And what people would do is if they knew someone with that card, they would lend it to someone else, and that person could go up and buy a whole bunch of VAT stuff. It's all cheap. And they had a record section in there. So I always used to say my mom, I couldn't go up with her because I didn't have the card. She would go up with her friend, go in, and I would say, buy some albums. So a lot of my early albums were bought by my mom. She knew I wanted to get Deep Purple, a Deep Purple album. So she bought for me a double album, I'm so excited, called Deep Purple in Concert. And this was an album that came out in 1980, and it basically explored the early Gillan lineup, which is still enthralled by that sort of very improvisationary approach of the first lineup, and then the 73 lineup, which had also done Made in Japan. These recordings done by the BBC, and it was as though the band didn't know that they were being recorded. Little bit like Made in Japan. They're just playing. There's a version of Space Trucking on there. It's about 20 minutes long. The improvisations are even more outlandish and out there than Made in Japan. That was my first Deep Purple album. I was listening to White Snake, Rape. Imagine that. I'm into Motorhead, Judas Priest, all that type of stuff. And I put that album on, and I'm dealing with 10 minutes of like feedback and noise from Ritchie Blackmore. With these incredibly fast accelerated beats from Ian Pace. I was blown away by this. My dad was a jazz fan, and I can remember I was listening to it thinking, well, what the hell's this? This isn't bloody White Snake. And my dad came in and he listened to it and he went, that's really good. He said, this is a great, and I thought, oh my God, Dad, my dad likes this. And this is where I became enthralled with Deep Purple at that point. I went out and bought Deep Purple in Rock, blew me away. Then I started to get the albums, Machine Head, Fireball, Who Do We Think We Are? All these albums come taste the band, and none of them lived up to the studio bombast of Deep Purple in Rock, and they definitely didn't live up to the live experience of Deep Purple. I then got Made in Japan again. I was never blown away by Made in Japan. For me, it was Deep Purple in concert, and there was another one that came out a few years later called Deep Purple Live in London, which covered the later lineup when Ian Gillan left with Roger Glover, and they brought in Glenn Hughes and David Coverdale. Now, this is the first thing that niggles me about Deep Purple. I don't think the studio albums are that good, right? I think the early albums we can discount. They're like who listens to Shades of Deep Purple? Somebody must do, I don't. Deep Purple in Rock's amazing. Fireball's great, but it's just the production's a bit, it's a bit thin. It's great, and I like it more than the classic Machine Head, which is a great album full of brilliant tunes, but they're played better on Made in Japan. Then at that point, After Machine Head, the band is now floundering around. And the reason why is because when you get musicians together, they haven't formed in their school or their local town. You've got all these incredibly talented visionary players together. They have all ideas. Deep Purple was this heavy sort of post-Hendrix wizards and demons, sword and sorcery vision of Ritchie Blackmore. And at the same time, it was just this souped up rhythm and blues band. By 1972, 73, you can tell Stevie Wonder's coming out, James Brown's coming out, and Deep Purple are the funkiest of the rock bands, basically. And they want to go down that route, don't they? And there seems to be a schism opening up. And as the studio albums develop, they move away from that rock sound. And Ritchie Blackmore's not, he's not that happy with it. They go out on tour. He sees a band called Elf. And Ian Gillan wants to go towards a more, let's say, jazz rock approach. And he sees his singer, Ronnie James Dio. And Ronnie James Dio is all sword and sorcery, isn't he? I don't know how that, denotes sword and sorcery, but in Ronnie James Dio case, it does, doesn't it? So he comes out doing all that with the shoulders up, So he takes this band Elf and he makes an album. And he calls it Rainbow, Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow. And he loves it. So in pure Ritchie Blackmore style, he then, takes it over, because it's his band, sacks everybody, and then forms this band Rainbow. Now, for me, the spirit of Deep Purple then transfers into Rainbow. And Rainbow Rising is the natural air of Deep Purple in rock. And Rainbow Rising is unbelievable. Right? The follow-up, Long Live Rock and Roll, is unbelievable. And even when we go through to albums like Down to Earth, where Ritchie Blackmore is moving away from his witches and demons type of approach to rock and going to something that sounds a lot more like Foreigner, it still has that crunching sound to it. There's a sound there, the screaming vocals. Graham Bonnet's incredible. Always has amazing vocals, Ritchie Blackmore does. But the spirit of Deep Purple transfers into Rainbow, the Ritchie Blackmore. And I wonder how much Deep Purple is Ritchie Blackmore. So park that. So what happens with Deep Purple when Blackmore leaves? What can happen there? Well, they'd already gone and got Glenn Hughes and David Coverdale in. Glenn Hughes, did he come from Trapeze? Was that it? And Coverdale was the singer. And they're a lot more soulful. And it starts getting funkier. Burn is an amazing album, but it's not quite the Deep Purple of a Deep Purple. Something else is going on here. But Burn has got that accelerated sound. It's all there with that. And then again, the albums start to diminish rather than expanding on that. They diminish for me. Ritchie Blackmore jumped ship, as we said, and they bring in Tommy Bolin. And you could tell these guys are jazz fusion guys because Tommy Bolin has made his name by playing on a Billy Cobham album, Spectrum. Come Taste of the Band is amazing. So my favourite studio albums by Deep Purple are In Rock, Burn, and Come Taste the Band. That I don't need anything else. Tommy Bolin is a genius guitarist, equal to Ritchie Blackmore, but different. He comes in and the band's viable with Tommy Bolin in, except he's got drug problems, and in 1976 he dies of a heroin overdose, and the band's done. Coverdale goes off and he forms a band called Whitesnake, which is exploring this much funkier rhythm and blues approach that Deep Purple Mark III, the David Coverdale Deep Purple, have been exploring. And that spirit then goes on into Whitesnake. Now, if we take a tune like Mistreated, which is a Deep Purple tune, it's interesting because Mistreated also gets played on Live in the Heart of the City by Whitesnake, and it's on Long Live Rock and Roll. It's shared out.
I've been mistreated. I've been abused. Been so downhearted, baby, yeah. I'm feeling confused.
I have to say, both of those bands for me, this is where the Warts and All bits come in, and I'm going to tell you what I think. For me as bands, Rainbow and Whitesnake are even greater because it's closer to the visions of what's going on. The Coverdale, John Lord, funky rhythm and blues approach, Whitesnake do absolutely brilliantly, and I'm afraid I feel they're massively underrated. But those albums, as they go through, you know, to Love Hunter, up to Ready and Willing and Come and Get It, those albums are as great as anything Deep Purple ever did. The band sounds amazing, and it's not about heavy rock, heavy metal. It's about, there's a funkiness and a rhythm and bluesiness there. Bernie Marsden and Mickey Moody, that twin guitar thing is incredible. And bringing in, on Ready and Willing, you get Ian Pace, John Lord, David Coverdale. That is an aspect. So Deep Purple is not like Zeppelin or Sabbath. In that the spirit of Deep Purple fractures into these two bands. Rainbow go to the wizards and demons, sword and sorcery, stargazers, you know, wizards falling off towers and all that bit. And they do that very well. Both of them in the 80s are going to go to a much more AOR, foreigner, mainstream rock sound. Both of them are going to do that, and they're both going to have careers. So they're actually going to join forces. You know, by the mid-80s, they're much more on the same page, which is interesting. But in terms of that period, the classic Deep Purple period from 68 to 76, there is not much there for me. Made in Japan, loads of live albums that came out after the event, and then 3 studio albums. I know people are going to say Machine Head's a masterpiece. It is. I said, yeah, but I'm never going to listen to that. I'm going to put Made in Japan on to listen to that. Those tracks are much better on Made in Japan. So there's not much there. Incredible band. But I believe, for me, when I think of Deep Purple, it's the legacy of Deep Purple, which is Rainbow, Whitesnake, but also Gillan. Ian Gillan jumped ship, and he formed a full-on jazz rock group called the Ian Gillan Band. That is a really interesting band. Then he goes back to some of the guys from the Outlaws, Mick Underwood. He brings in Bernie Torme, who's this sort of Hendrixy, almost like Ritchie Blackmore-esque guitarist. John McCoy, the bass player, very iconic, great bass player. Colin Towns on keyboards, classically trained, knows what he's doing, ended up doing film soundtracks. And that Gillan band is a classic band. The band was called Gillan. If he'd have called that band a name like Whitesnake or Rainbow, we would have perceived it differently, but that band was unbelievable. And those albums like Future Shock and Double Trouble and, you know, Magic, all those albums that he did at that point, these are the classic Deep Purple albums, right? And I think if you take that legacy as being part of the sort of whole Deep Purple world of rock, it's like now we've got brilliant albums. Rainbow Rising, Long Live Rock and Roll, Down to Earth, I love Difficult to Cure. I think Straight Between the Eyes is a little bit of a drop-in thing, and then it gets too foreignery for me with Bent Out of Shape, and then they're done. Whitesnake, again, they do a whole bunch of, you know, Slide It In and all those albums, but they eventually, 1987 comes out, sells about 30 million records, and it becomes one of the great sort of hair metal acts of the 1980s, and that's Whitesnake done. But there's some incredible albums before that, the same thing with Gillan. Then we start to get these malaise that kicks in with these musicians, and it happens in 1985. Gillan had already jumped ship and destroyed the band Gillan, and also managed to ruin Black Sabbath by doing this lineup, which was basically Black Sabbath with Ian Gillan on vocals, and then they went out live with Bev Bevan, so it was like an ELO, Deep Purple, Black Sabbath supergroup that went out, and it's great. But I think Gillan threw something out that was wonderful and was having hit records. It was a really great band. So they're thrashing around, and then the inevitable happens, doesn't it? In 1985, let's get the classic lineup back together, and they get back together for an album called Perfect Stranger. Now, this was a massive event. It was on mainstream TV. I can remember watching videos of, you know, they brought a single out, didn't they, for the first release. I can't remember what it was called, but there was a single where they're all in the studio, Ritchie Blackmore's there, and then Gillan walks in, and they look at each other, and they're all like mean because they'd fallen out, and then they go up and shake hands. Now I think this is all a bit whipped up, because when Ronnie James Dio left Rainbow, Ian Gillan was considered to come into Rainbow. So they must have had some sort of relationship. Anyway, Perfect Stranger is a really great Deep Purple album. And from that point on, Deep Purple has sort of kept going. Ritchie Blackmore's left. Many of them have left. Some of them have died. John Lord died eventually. And we now have the lineup that we see today. Deep Purple released an album, was it last year or the year before? I had to listen to it. I thought it was wonderful. They have been able to release a whole ton of brilliant albums, great Deep Purple albums. They haven't fallen into the trap. They're old men now. They're cranking out a style of music that is only relevant to other old men. They are not a forward-seeking band because they're old men. It's like they are just doing what you expect from Deep Purple. John Lord was replaced by Don Airey, who is just such an incredible keyboard player and he more than fills his shoes. We've still got Ian Pace in the band. We've got Ian Gillan in the band. Roger Glover's still in the band. And Ritchie Blackmore's been replaced by a new guy, which interjects a whole bunch of energy. And he's not some sort of jazz fusion whiz like the guy they had before, Steve Morse, one of the great fusion guitarists. He's a straight down the line rock player. And it's brilliant. It's all brilliant. But I loved it when they had Steve Morse in. I love Deep Purple. Have I listened to any of those albums? No, I'm not interested. I'm not interested at all. So, Deep Purple are a troublesome band for me. If we compare them with the other two big rock bands, Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath, Sabbath come out in 1970 with their debut album, and they don't put a foot wrong, and I would argue even up to Never Say Die, and I think Never Say Die is an incredible album. They don't put a foot wrong, and then when they get rid of Ozzy, and they get Ronnie James Dio in from Rainbow, they do Heaven and Hell and Mob Rules, and then the Live Evil. That run, all the way through, is wonderful. Then they start going wrong. Led Zeppelin, they just never go wrong. Even my least favourite album by them, In Through the Outdoor, is a good album. The rest are masterpieces. They never put a foot wrong. And then they called it a day. Deep Purple's patchy. They are patchy, right? Now, this is where I can now start to get a little bit nasty and vicious in the second half of this. Ritchie Blackmore seems like a petulant pain in the arse, doesn't he? He seems to be incredibly arrogant and difficult. He seems to be bossy, and he sort of relishes in being like that almost. He relishes in that, the fact that he's the man in black, the nasty guy.
I'm not too keen on people that voice their opinion very loudly.
And it seems so many times that he would throw, like a petulant child, which is often what he looks like on stage, he would throw his toys out of the pram. And this seems to be very, very annoying and it's worn the band down. And in doing so, it sort of, Deep Purple could not evolve in the way it wanted to evolve. The other members seem to be not like that at all. And the lineup of Whitesnake, I mean, that could have easily had Roger Glover in with David Coverdale in. I think they all could have just carried on and done that. So Ritchie Blackmore's a bit of a pain in the bum, right?
I ask a lot of musicians. I ask them to do things which is probably not what most musicians would do, in the way of like, I expect them to kind of drop their trousers occasionally. You know, I mean, this is not asking too much. And some people react to this in rather a violent way. They say, I'm not going to do this. I'm not, homosexual. And I say, well, nor am I.
Now, Ritchie Blackmore has a vision which is, there's two problems with it. One, it's incredibly derivative. Incredibly derivative. Every single track by Deep Purple, if you go and Google it, you will find that it's ripped off from somewhere else. You know, a lot of the riffs are bass lines ripped off from Hendrix. Black Knight is a straight lift from another band, can't remember what they're called, but I've talked about it on another video. I will put it in on the annotations here so you can
One day you're up and the next day you're down. You can't face the world, put your head to the ground. The grass is on the street around the other side, they say. So don't worry, boys, that will be sweet someday.
see it. And it's worth checking out what a rip-off that is. I mean, it's a proper rip-off. He seems completely enamored by classical music and Jimi Hendrix. If you were to take Jimi Hendrix and combine it with bombastic Wagnerian classical music, you have Ritchie Blackmore's vision. But Ritchie Blackmore's vision is also the vision of the worst aspects of heavy rock. When I was a lad, there was an advert for this chicken product. And there was a sign that, song that went with it where they went, I feel like chicken tonight, like chicken tonight. And at one point they did a pastiche of a rock band and they had some sort of goblin-y looking bloke, a bit like Ronnie James Dio, going, I feel like chicken tonight. And that sort of screamy aspect of heavy rock. That's, you see, when the grunge guys come out, they don't sing like that. Or if they do sing like that, they're like more soulful, like David Coverdale. But that screaming type of, you know, that hair metal screaming thing, that's Ritchie Blackmore's vision. Ronnie James Dio, Graham Bonnet, Joe Lynn Turner, they're all incredible singers, but they all come from that because he wants it to be like opera, right? That neoclassical thing is him. Yngwie Malmsteen's an incredible guitarist, but he's got terrible taste. I'm basically saying Ritchie Blackmore's amazing, right? And it's incredible what he does, but it's incredibly bad taste, right? It's bad. He's got bad taste. Rainbow Rising, I love it. It's bombastic and amazing, but it's not like Led Zepp 4 because it's all a bit cheesy. As much as I love Stargazer, I put it on, my hair stands on end. And I love the fact in a sort of postmodernist way, it's about this crazy wizard building a tower. It's building a tower so that he can jump off the tower and fly. Why not just jump off a cliff? Why are you going to have all these bloody slaves? Ronnie James Dio's one of the slaves. You never have Ronnie James Dio as a slave. He's too little. You know, he'll be, come on, hurry up, Ronnie. You know, carry that rock. You know, carry a little one. I'm only little. Stop having to go. And Ronnie James Dio would get annoyed if you see the interview where someone says you're not very big and he gets really arsey. Well, I can't blame him, can you, really, when you see how that bloke's talking to him? I mean, I don't have a go at Ronnie James Dio at all. You know, but he was a little bloke, and in terms of his ability to, you know, do slave labour, I think he'd be rubbish. But there he is, and he's watching it, and the wizard doesn't jump off a cliff, climbs up the tower they built, and then he goes, right, watch me, everybody. And it's almost like Ritchie Blackmore. This is Ritchie Blackmore. Look, everybody, I've built a great big tower, and I am now going to fly because I'm bloody the wizard, and watch what I can do. And he just jumps off, whoo, bang, on the floor, dead. And Ritchie Blackmore writes a song about that with a full orchestra on it, heaving away the Munich Philharmonic Orchestra. Ding, 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 ding. You know, Stargazer's amazing. It's amazing. Cozy Pal. In fact, you want to see me do that, Phil, on Cozy Pal's drum kit? Let's do that. So there, Hendrix, fusion keyboard. Noon bird, I sell my soul for water. This is rock music. It is brilliant, but it's what makes rock cheesy. Later on, he marries some blonde bint, as we say in the UK, and he forms Blackmore's Night, where he dresses up like something out of the medieval period and goes around playing lutes and stuff like this with shoes with curls at the end and all that type of bit. You know, hey nonny nonny, it all goes like that, and I like it. You see, I love it. I like the fact that Ritchie Blackmore's like that. You know, when he comes on now, I mean, the guy's 80 years old, right? He's 80 years old. He comes on, right? He's been bald for the last 50 years, you know. What made him bald, I don't know. But I think Ritchie Blackmore is more than just male pattern baldness with Blackmore. I think he's properly bald. So he's had this wig for years and years and years, and it's a good wig. But there he is with his little goatee thing dyed black and his hair, like a British pixie version of Gene Simmons, right? And he sits there being all grumpy, like a grumpy. You're the grumpy elf, aren't you, Ritchie? With his wife next to him, who's obviously about 40 years younger than him, all blonde and pretty. I mean, he's got it made, really. And what does he do now? He goes out and does Blackmore Night, does he? All hey nonny. I can't criticise him. There's something about Richie Blackmore I love.
Oh, actually, I think this album has more traditional based melodies than any of the other albums that we've wound up doing.
I think we've ripped more people off on this record than we've ever done before.
There's so much material for me to hate him here, and I'm doing the material here now. Second off, I'm doing this stuff, and I'm exploring it as much as I can, but I can't help but just go, it's bloody brilliant. You know, if I'm 80 years old, if I'm sat there with a wig and some bloody Pilgrim's hat on, you know, with a band where I basically go out on acoustic guitar and do hey nonny nonnies and, you know, have elves jumping round fires and going down and dealing with the foresty folk and all, I'm happy with a nice blonde lady next to me that sings along to my songs and seems to love me very much, even though I'm an old fart. And I don't think Richie Blackmore is an old fart. He's not aged, has he? He's not these... I mean, is he ever going to die? Well, I mean, he's going to die at some point, obviously, but he doesn't look like he's going to die.
I think a lot about death more than life, because we're going towards death. And I think death is very important. I think it's going to happen to all of us, most of us, not all. Some of us might get away with it. That's what Bob Dylan said.
Mm-hmm.
Bob Dylan came up to me once and he said, hey, who the hell are you?
I mean, Ian Gillan, he was a very good-looking bloke in the old days. You look at him now, he's definitely got old, hasn't he? I mean, Ian Gillan looks old, doesn't he? Really old. Roger Glover, really old. I mean, Ian Pace had a cheruby face, didn't he? And the great big sideboards, those great big sideboards. But now... Ian Pace needs to get his hair cut. I mean, Gillan's got his hair cut. You know, when you get to a certain age, you've got to get your hair cut. I had long hair all my life. I've had my hair cut. I'm only 57. You know, these are guys who are in their 80s, you know. But they can still deliver it. Don Airey looks like he's about 100 years old. Blackmore doesn't. Blackmore looks like he's ageless. He's a force of nature, isn't he? I can't criticise him. I tried to. Here we are, warts and all, what I hate about. I can't hate him. I love him. I love Richie Blackmore. And when I was watching him last night, I was watching Rainbow in Munich, 1977. Unbelievable. Better than Deep Purple, right? It's just Cozy Powell. They've got Dave Stone on keyboards. He does his Hammond organ solo. It's proper bloody Jimmy Smith going on. And Cozy Powell is just, his touch, I know he's bombastic, he's got that great big jump kick, but he's so light at certain points. Traditional grip going back to, monster. Bob Daisley on bass, beautiful, you know, bluesy playing. They can do all the neoclassical stuff. They can also play the blues. And Blackmore, it's like he's doing these guitar solos, and it's wonderful. It's not all about chops. He's got chops, but it's not about chops. It's about his touch. He's like Jeff Beck. He's got an incredible tone, but he does something different. And there's one point where he throws the guitar down and it's facing him, the neck's facing him like this. I'll show you what he does. This is supposed to be me hating them. He's got his guitar like this and he's holding it. I don't know, he must be holding it between his legs like that. And he starts pouring it. It looks like my cat, you know, when my cat doesn't want to stay in the room anymore. They're like, Dad, can you let us out? No, I'm not getting up. I want to go out the door, no. And then they go up to the door, the cat doesn't go, let me out. And there's Richie Blackmore looking like a grumpy cat that wants to be let out. You know, he does all this stuff like this. He wipes his arm down the neck. Oh, I love him. He's got his bloody reel tape. What's he got reel-to-reel going on for the background? Is he recording everything so he can... You know, I know what it is. It's a bloody tape loop, isn't it? But I'm pretending I don't know what it is. You know, is he recording everybody so he can go through it afterwards and sack people? When he formed Rainbow, he went sack. He was like the Stalin of rock, wasn't he? He'll sack everybody. You know, there's people that are in Rainbow. I was going through who's played in Rainbow, and most of them, it's like they have no shadow in that band. There's nothing that they did. They were in the band, then they were out. Then someone else comes in and they are out. You know, and there's a lot going on with the Rainbow musicians. There's so many. I want to do a video on Rainbow and go through these musicians because there's a lot of stories behind these musicians and people who went through Rainbow. You know, a lot going on. One of them got murdered. One of the people that was in, I can't remember his name, that's why I'm treading more, because I want to just tell you this fact and I haven't told you very well. One of them got murdered, he got involved in some drug deal. Who was that? Anyway, David Coverdale, who also he's got old, but he is not aged like Ian Gillan has. And he looks quite strange to me when I see David Coverdale now. Because I think what they did was he had his face removed about 20 years ago, and they've like done some process on it to freeze it. And now he wears it as a mask, and he puts on this wig, and he's gentleman enough to not dye his hair black. He's got a grey wig, I think. I mean, if that's his real hair, I'll be... Anyway, he looks like he's been petrified, not like frightened. He looks like he's been, like, encased in something. I mean, I don't know, preserved. That's what the word I'm looking for. He has retired. He did a wonderful video. He is like the Donald Sinden of rock, isn't he, now? But in the old days, he always seemed to have a lot of beans, didn't he? He was very full of beans, wasn't he? Sex beans, we could call them. He was very full of he was very, you know, he was always he always liked to see the dog. He always liked to let the dog see the rabbit. Let us say that, if you know what I'm saying. Whereas I have heard through the grapevine, and I will not give my sources away, but the guy that was really one for letting the dog see the rabbit was Ian Gillan. You know, this is what happens when you got, this is lead singer, good-looking lead singer syndrome. Coverdale, I mean, I called the band White Snake. But my basic point here about this is Deep Purple, unlike Sabbath are cool, Led Zeppelin's cool. Deep Purple has an aspect about Deep Purple that's not cool. They're really not. There's nothing cool about Deep Purple, right? Their album covers are terrible, right? For the early days, they have this idea of putting their faces where their faces shouldn't be. So 1 minute they're on Mount Rushmore, the next thing they're candles. This is a really bad idea. 1 minute they're a fireball, 1 minute they're reflecting and all twisted inside metal. 1 minute they're all living inside a bloody wine thing. And I thought they kept it going. Not always, you know, but they often would keep it going. So their little faces are on the cover. And rock bands, they should never be on the covers of their albums. Think about it. They shouldn't be on the covers of their albums. Did Led Zeppelin ever go on the cover of an album? Ever? Right? Sort of on Led Zeppelin 2, I think you can see them, but they're doing a Deep Purple. They do it properly though, don't they? But after that, you're never going to see them again, do you? Is that right? Is there an album? No, they're not. Sabbath did it on Sabotage. Worst mistake they ever made. Right? The cover of Volume 4, rubbish. But Deep Purple's, just horrible graphics. I used to, as a kid, look at Deep Purple in rock, and I used to think, that's just black and white photographs of their faces. They've stuck it on to a picture of Mount Rushmore. They try to paint around it. There's no graphics done. I mean, they can do it now. It will work. Deep Purple in rock. I mean, it's terrible. It's absolutely terrible. And the thing is, if I had that idea, I'd go, right, why not put them on Mount Rushmore? Well, we can't, can we? Why? Because there's 5 of you. There's only 4 heads on Mount Rushmore. You can only have 4 on there. Well, we'll just stick one a bit lower down. You can't do that. It's going to look stupid. I know, well, who's going to go down there? Well, get Ian to do it. Why? Well, he's the youngest, the littlest. He does whatever he says, you know. We'll put him downstairs, and then we can use his foresty sideboards as a sort of, we can mesh that into the foliage. The foliage that exists on the bottom of Mount Rushmore. Oh, I will do it then if that's the case. I wish I'd brought my album out now. I could be holding it in my hand and looking at it and laughing. Yeah, there's something cheesy about Deep Purple. If there's something comic about them, what else do I hate about them? I'm not a fan of Ian Gillan's voice. I love Ian Gillan, and when he sings a song and he does that sort of, my woman from Tokyo, I love that voice. But when on Made in Japan, he does this, like Woody Woodpecker, and then it's like, because they do these jewels, you see. They do these jewels, you know. And so Richie Blackmore will go, and he can tell because he doesn't like Gillan, he's going way too high. He's like, oh, I'm going to go so high, you're going to sound like a fool. So he goes, and then Gillan goes, and he goes, And I had it on the car the other day. I'm driving along. I thought, I hope nobody could hear this outside, because I don't want anybody to think that I would listen to this rubbish. It's just terrible. And I mean, Deep Purple's Made in Japan's amazing, because they didn't expect when they recorded it. It was really good. Well, we should put this out. They put it out in Japan. It became a massive hit, so they put it out and it became their most important album. It's the sound of it. It's the band together. But so I'm not a massive fan. I like Coverdale's voice more. I do. But not. I don't love it. I don't love their voices. I love Ozzy Osbourne's voice. I love Robert Plant's voice. I don't know. I'm not so keen there. I love Ian Pace. John Lord's amazing. I think I've got to the back end of this warts and all exploration off the cuff. I haven't done any research for this, by the way. So all the facts and figures I'm just pulling out of my basic Deep Purple knowledge. So if I've got anything wrong, I do apologise. What else can we say? I think if we take the legacy bands in, Gillan, Whitesnake and Rainbow, and we put all that together, this is a monumental achievement in rock. And it all represents something, doesn't it? But you see, Whitesnake, that's all that big, that's the cock rock aspect, isn't it? And Rainbow, that's the sort of sword and sorcery. And then later on, they join the sort of foreigner, middle of the road, bloody Since You've Been Gone thing. But see, this is the Been Gone's bloody amazing. Russ Ballard's written. It's a good song. They delivered a good song there. How do I finish this video? I don't know. It's a bit unstructured, but it is what it is. I absolutely love Deep Purple. In doing this video, I'm going to go somewhere now, and I'm going to grab Made in Japan on CD. I've got it on an album on CD. I'm going to grab that. I'm going to put it on in the car, and I'm going to love it because I loved it. Last night, I lay in bed watching this video of Rainbow. What a band! What a band! And it sounds like an album. It's incredible. The likes of these sort of high-powered virtuoso rock bands that weren't just a bunch of sessions. It's like a Steely Dan gig where they just stood there getting paid and just doing what they're told. They were a band. They were a band, and they operate like a band. But the instrumental ability is off the charts, and it's just wonderful stuff. Deep Purple, for me, really lay the groundwork for Van Halen and that ilk that then creates this sort of supercharged virtuoso rock in the 1980s that ends up with your Steve Vais, it ends up with the Yngwie Malmsteens, your Joe Satriani's. All of that comes out of Deep Purple for me. And when I came to fruition as a musician in the 1980s, and I started to look for good players, there were good players there because there was a whole generation coming up trying to learn surfing with the Alien, or bass players trying to play Radio Free Albemarle by Stuart Hamm. And a lot of those musicians then went on into jazz. And Deep Purple really are really great for creating that idea of instrumental virtuosity within rock, more than any other band. And we see that in the thrash metal bands, and that's stayed all the way through. And contrary to popular belief, having good musicians who are musical and are able to play does create great music. And I think that kept rock alive, and it's something that's more subtler than just pointing to the riffs of Black Sabbath, So, great band. A great but patchy band with bad taste and a pain in the arse guitarist who we can't help but love. That is the warts and all assessment of the great Deep Purple. Like, subscribe, join my Patreon. Oh, I'm not saying this at the end of it. You'll just do what you know. You know how to do all this stuff, don't you? If you're watching it now and go, I quite like this. Nobody ever subscribes because anyone says it. You watch it, I like this. But when I subscribe, I go, I like this, but I'm going to subscribe. I don't need to be told it by the person who's there. I'm not doing it anymore. I'm not going to jump straight into the video. I'm going to do that 5 minutes to get rid of all the time wasters. I still get the view counted. It still gets counted, but they can bugger off, right? And then they can write a comment, which is totally out of context because they didn't watch the video in the first place. They didn't realise I covered that anyway, right? And they don't understand my way of doing things here on YouTube, right? I have a way of doing things. You must realise this. This is the way I do. I can't help it. It's the way I am. I'm not a bad person, I promise you. Right? All these things they say about me. Bloody hell. Anyway, last night, not only did I watch Rainbow Live in Munich 1977, but I decided, and it's like, this is like being a drug addict. I tell myself not to do it, but there's this part in YouTube Studio, and you go in and you click in it, and it's all the comments that have been withheld. And they're all the ones with swearing in, or they're a bit sexual or something like that. Then there's grossly offensive, and they're hidden. So once you're in this folder where all the ones that have been censored are, and everyone thinks I'm deleting them, I'm not, it's YouTube. Then you click on it and it goes, do you want to see these? Can you take it? Right? Do you have a strong enough sense of yourself to be able to traverse the evil world of hate that is now going to come your way when you click on this? Do you want to really click on it? And I'm like, I don't know. What have they been saying about it? If I don't click on it, then what's in my mind will be worse than what I mentioned. But then if I click on it, it is really bad. I realise that there's loads of people out there I don't know who hate me, and I won't like it because I'm a human being and I don't like being hated. So I go through that, then I click it, and you go in there, and then you read what the worst people have said about you. Unbelievable. Old classic album review, Barry, he really gets upset because he's an English gentleman. Like, he just don't like the coarseness. He won't have it. And quite regularly he comes out and gets all the worst ones, and he goes through them all, doesn't he? I did on Patreon for a little bit. Well, I don't do it now. I've risen above it. Risen above it. I'm going to finish off with a song for those people who put the nasty comments up. That's how I'm going to do it. I checked the comments out on my YouTube channel. This man had said that I am stupid. I wondered why he's been so nasty, so I went and got a Greg's pasty, and I ate it, then spat it out on his reply. Why you being horrible? I don't want those nasty comments on my YouTube channel. They are nice. They are nice. They said that I was really annoying. They said I was a twat. I thought that's not very nice. Why would somebody want to say something like that? I tried to push back against the comment, pretended like I didn't care. But I don't like when they say nasty words. Why do they have to swear? Get off my YouTube, you foul-mouthed fool. It's not my fault you love the Grateful Dead. You like rubbish music, and it's not my fault. Why don't you go away and go to Rigby Atto and bother him instead? Bother him instead. Bother him instead. These are the swords of gods that Rigby Atto loves.